Hello, I'm Amy Tsui. I'm talking to you from the University of Hong Kong. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you directly about my work, and I want to thank you for inviting me. I think it's a great idea to bring researchers together like this. My research interests cover a wide range of areas, including discourse analysis, classroom discourse, casual conversation, corpus linguistics, ESL teaching and learning, and more recently on teacher development, teacher learning, and also language policy. In this talk, I want to focus specifically on my work on expertise in teaching and also teacher development. I've been a teacher educator for nearly 20 years, and I've always admired teachers, many of whom are my former students, who can command respect from students, who seem to have endless new ideas, and who is highly effective in the classroom. And I often marvel at the great care with which they seem to be able to handle all sorts of unpredictable events in the classroom. So for this reason, I was very much attracted by the research on expert teachers. In the early 90s, there were a number of studies on expertise in teaching, comparing novice and expert teachers. And as I was going through these studies, I kept seeing statements about expert teachers being able to handle their task in an effortless way with great fluidity, and it seems to me that things come to them automatically. I was not entirely convinced by these research findings, so I started talking to my teachers who I felt were really very, very good teachers, and I asked them whether, with their experience, with their years of teaching, whether they found their work that they have to put less effort into their work, and whether they feel that ideas just come to them automatically. But a lot of them told me that that was not the case, that in fact they really work very hard, and despite the years of experience, they still think of each individual lesson. They do a lot of lesson planning, and they even rehearse their lessons mentally at the day before teaching. I was intrigued by what these teachers told me, so I started systematically to investigate the work of expert teachers, which culminated in my book, Understanding Expertise in Teaching, published by Cambridge University Press in 2003. In the rest of my talk, I'm going to elaborate what I've discussed in the book. I'm also going to highlight some of the areas which I think need further research. I'm going to start off with the question, why do we study expertise in teaching? I guess, as we all know, teaching is considered a minor, quote-unquote, profession, to put it in Donald Schoen's words. Teachers are considered minor professionals because they do not have the kind of rigorous and scientific knowledge that professionals like doctors and physicists and so forth and lawyers have. So one of the major motivations for studying expertise in teaching is to demonstrate to the public and to the community that teachers, like other experts, do have a very solid knowledge base, and that the teaching profession ought to be respected in the same way as other professionals are. Another motivation is an intrinsic interest in the knowledge of teachers. That is, the teachers hold a special form of knowledge, which is described as, or can be described as, knowing how, rather than knowing that. In other words, their knowledge is very much embedded in expert action, and that this kind of action is intuitive and tacit. The studies of the characteristics of expert teachers burgeoned in the late 80s and 90s and early 90s. And they were largely inspired by the work of experts, chess masters, expert physicists, radiologists, and so forth. And a lot of these studies took the form of comparing novice teachers with expert teachers. And the findings of these studies show that expert teachers have the following characteristics: that they are able to exercise autonomy, they're efficient, effective, and they seem to be able to conduct their work with very little effort. They're much more flexible and responsive to context, and also they have a rich and integrated knowledge base. When they're in the classroom, they are able to recognize patterns in classroom events very quickly. They could easily differentiate critical information from salient but incidental information. That is information that is salient but is not critical and not as important. They're able to improvise so that if there's anything which is unpredictable, they could, as we call it, think on their feet. And they are also able to interpret classroom events in a principled and meaningful way. So a large number of studies in the 80s and 90s have pointed to the same, or have yielded the same findings. The characterization of teaching expertise generated by novice and expert studies have been criticized by a number of researchers for not being able to accurately reflect the work of teachers. And one of the most significant critiques of expert-novice comparisons is the work of Bareiter and Scardamalia in their 1993 work, Surpassing Ourselves, which is an excellent book. They were among the first to question the image of expert performance as efficient, automatic, and effortless. They found that, in fact, in their own studies of people like expert writers, that they found that expert writers actually worked much harder and longer hours. The difference is that the work that they produced was of much higher quality. And Bareiter and Scardamalia argued that the conflicting images of experts could have resulted from the fact that very often in the expert-novice studies, the tasks that were given to expert and novice teachers was the same. So that it's a task that could be handled by novice teachers, but for expert teachers, it's very easy for them to complete. And this is why when you compare the performance of these teachers, you'll find that expert teachers did not have to spend a lot of time completing that task. So what they pointed out was that the critical difference between novice and expert teachers is not in the efficiency and automaticity in solving problems, but rather in the kinds of problems that they solve or the way they choose to solve problems. And they pointed out that experts, according to their studies, they solve problems, the kind of problems which would require them to extend their competence, or they choose to solve problems which will which actually require them to extend their competence, and they call this progressive problem solving. The other characteristic that they identified was that experts as they gain more experience, they actually will put their efforts and time into solving more difficult problems. So that this is what they refer to as reinvesting their resources. I found that the characterization that Barita and Scardamalia made of expert teachers tallied very much with my own knowledge and understanding of expert teachers, in the sense that the expert teachers actually tackled and solved problems in a different manner compared to novice teachers. So what they proposed was that the kind of expertise that the expertise that was characterized in expert novice studies was that they were looking at expertise as a state of performance rather than a process. So what they proposed was that we should look at expertise as a process rather than a state. The characterization of expertise by Barita and Scardamalia provides a new perspective for understanding expertise in general, and also expertise in teaching in particular. And so I started systematically investigating an expert teacher who I known for a number of years, and who was actually my student in our PTGE program. And what I did was that I actually followed this teacher for a year and a half, going into her classroom whenever she taught a specific class, and looking at the way she handled all aspects of ESL teaching. I also talked to the students after class and during recess and so forth. What I also did at the same time was to observe two teachers who were experienced but not expert teachers, or what we would call competent teachers, and also a novice teacher. And what I found was that the characteristics that emerged from my study of this teacher, Marina, was that she, as Barita and Scardamalia observed, actually worked very long hours, spent a lot of time preparing lessons, agonized over how she could revise and modify her materials in order to get students interested and so forth. And I've sort of outlined all these characteristics in the book. But to summarize the characteristics, I would say that there are three major characteristics that emerge from that study. The first thing is that she engages in a process of constant renewal of knowledge, and it's in the process of integrating formal knowledge and personal practical knowledge. What I mean by this is that she constantly tried to theorize her practical knowledge in the classroom by articulating principles that guides her teaching. But at the same time, she also tried to seek formal knowledge by going to seminars, by reading them, by subsequently doing a master's degree in TESOL. At the same time, when she came across new ideas and new theory in the course, she would try to implement them in the classroom. And I've sort of summarized this aspect of her work as practicalizing theoretical knowledge and theorizing practical knowledge. The second characteristic is her extraordinary capability of problematizing the unproblematic. What I mean is, what appears to be unproblematic to people, she would actually ask questions. She would problematize it. An example that I gave in the book was her teaching of writing, where it was her students responded well to her. She was doing what all other teachers were doing, and giving essay topics for students to write, basically engaging in product writing. But she was unhappy about that because she felt that the teachers spent a lot of time marking students' assignments, and marking their compositions, giving them comments and so forth. But she didn't see a lot of improvement in their student writing. So she started asking questions about why was she doing that, and why were her colleagues doing that? Couldn't there be a better way to teach writing? And she came across the idea of process approach to writing, and she thought, well, maybe this is something that she should embark on. And so she led a whole team of over 10 teachers to start experimenting on that. And of course, through a whole process of involving her colleagues and exploring the use of this approach to the teaching of writing, she was able to accomplish very, very good results from the students, and also got the whole team of teachers working together. So that was the second characteristic. In other words, this is very much in line with what Scardamalia and Bareiter and Scardamalia were talking about reinvestment of resources. That is, she would give the time and effort that was freed up because of her experience in teaching, reinvesting that into solving a more difficult problem. The third characteristic is her extraordinary capability of perceiving situated possibilities. What I mean by situated possibilities is that in any context in which we work, there are bound to be constraints and also opportunities. And it is very important that we're able to see beyond these constraints and look at what are how one could go beyond these constraints and open up opportunities for learning for students and opportunities for our own professional growth. And what Marina was capable of doing was that she would not be constrained by what everybody thought was impossible, but really to try to exploit and make use of the available resources that she had for teaching. And I have given a lot of examples in the book. In my own study of expert teachers, what we found was that here we've got these conflicting images of expertise. And this is not only because of the nature of the tasks that was given to an expert teacher and to a novice teacher, as Bareiter and Scardamalia pointed out, but rather I think it is also because that there are different perspectives on expertise. The expert and novice studies look at expertise as a state of performance, whereas the study of expertise as a process is really looking at it as a process that mediates expert performance. And basically what we see here are both sides of the same coin. In other words, that when we look at expertise, of course we have to look at the characteristics of the performance of experts, but we also need to look at how did they get to where they are. That is, in other words, as I said, expertise as a process that mediates expert performance. So what I've said in the book is this, that in the process of attaining and maintaining expert performance in all kinds of skills, experts engage in continuous efforts to improve themselves. And once they lose the characteristics outlined in the development of expertise, they cease to perform at an expert level. They cease to be an expert. Expertise in teaching in the ESL field is an area which is still very new and not many studies have been conducted. And I think a lot of work should be done and needs to be done in relation to that. I'd just like to mention two specific areas which I think if you're interested in this area of research, you might wish to think about that. The first one has to do with the subject-specific teaching expertise. A lot of the studies in the literature are not about specific disciplines, although the studies themselves although studies were conducted on teachers like math teachers and science teachers and so forth, yet the characteristics that were outlined were not subject-specific. They were sort of generic kind of characteristics. I think in the field of ESL teacher education, that there's still a lot of room and there's still a need for looking at the subject-specific nature of teaching expertise. So, for example, in ESL teaching, the knowledge base of an ESL teacher has generated a lot of discussion in recent years, and the debates have been on how important it is that ESL teachers should have knowledge about the target language systems, or what has been referred to as teachers' language awareness, and about second language acquisition, about sociolinguistics, and so forth. So I think an area that is worth looking at is to look at the subject matter knowledge of expert ESL teachers, and of course also their pedagogical content knowledge, and that is how effective these teachers are in being able to represent subject matter knowledge to the students, being able to motivate students to learn a second language, and helping them to develop into proficient second language speakers and writers. This is one area of research. The other area which has been underexplored is cultural differences in the perceptions of what constitutes expertise in teaching. So, for example, in Japan, the emotional commitment to students is very important. A central concept in Japanese cultural theory of teaching is what it calls kusuno, or kakawari, which is the close interpersonal relationship with students. And this is considered a primary condition for teaching and for children to learn from the teacher. And so developing kasuna takes precedence over development of technical competence in teaching. In the People's Republic of China, for example, good teachers have been defined not only in terms of commitment to students, but also commitment to the subject of teaching. The commitment to subject of teaching embraces the cognitive and affective dimensions. In my own research on expert teachers in China, the good teacher should be genuinely interested in and feel excited about the subject that he or she is teaching. So here we see the cultural specific nature of how expertise is being defined in China. While commitment to students would be a dimension that's shared by a number of cultures, the kind of commitment to the subject matter as described in the Chinese culture is perhaps very specific. To conclude my talk, I'd like to come back to the question which I raised at the beginning, which is why is it important to study expertise in teaching? As I mentioned before, that one of the major motivations for studying expertise is to raise the status of the teaching profession by demonstrating to the profession and also to the general public that teachers do in fact have a solid knowledge base, which is no less sophisticated than experts in other fields. But I think what is even more important is the fact that the teaching profession needs an ever-increasing critical mass of expert teachers. And in order to do that, we need to have a good understanding of the processes of learning and the mechanisms of learning which mediate the development of expertise. This kind of understanding would enable the people like mentor teachers and teacher educators to identify emerging characteristics of expertise in teaching amongst young teachers so that they are well supported and appropriately challenged at various stages of their professional development. Thank you very much.